You know, it's pouring rain outside, so we figured it's a good time, good day to rig up rods. And you know, one question we get all the time, especially with jigging rods in particular, is braid versus monofilament. Like, what's best? What kind of line should I spool up when I'm jigging? I've got a couple of rods here rigged up, which, you know, I've got braid and I've got mono, and I like to use both. And I'm going to show you some, or maybe describe some scenarios where I feel like one can give you an advantage over the other. Now, I like to have both braid and mono in the boat with jig rods in particular, because here's the deal. Is if you're missing fish on mono, if you're sticking fish and they're coming unbuttoned, switch over to braid, especially if you're in deeper water, if you're making long casts from the boat. On the flip side, if you're not getting bit, a lot of times you can change that with mono. And so right now, for example, we've had all this cold weather, wind, rain, and it definitely seems like mono's been working better for me, especially when I'm using a jig and live bait. So if I'm using a jig and a minnow, a jig and a half crawler, jig and a leech, I feel like mono can give you a big advantage, especially if the bite's off a little bit. I think what happens is that with monofilament, you get a lot more stretch. And so the line's a lot more limber and you get a lot more stretch. And I think what happens is, you can imagine, you got bait on there, that walleye clamps down on that jig, and then that, as you move that rod forward, you get a little bit of stretch in the line where that fish feels that bait sliding out of its mouth. A lot of times they just gulp up on it a little more, a little better. Takes a little more to feel the fish, but you remember, when you can't necessarily feel the fish as well, the fish also can't feel you. And so that's one of the advantages of monofilament, especially with live bait early in the year. A lot of times those fish just need to suck up on it a couple of times. When you're using braided line, which is just 832 braid with just a 8-pound or 6-pound fluorocarbon leader, is that it's a lot more abrupt, and so the jig doesn't slide and glide as much. It's just, the actions are a lot more abrupt, and also when that fish punches that jig, not only do you feel the fish immediately, but the fish also feels you immediately. And so if they need to gulp up on it again, a lot of times that's where braid can cost you. And so what I find is, on tough bites, live bait, I like to use mono. On a good bite or in deep water, I'll have a tendency to use more braid. And also I like to use braid whenever I'm pitching plastics, or whenever I'm fishing around weeds where I just have to snap weeds off the jig. And so biggest thing is that there's no right or wrong. There's no silver bullet where this is what you always have to do in this situation. You have to feel your way through it, okay? And a lot of it's personal preference, whatever you're confident in, whatever you're used to, okay? But the big thing is, be comfortable using both, because there are definitely advantages. There's definitely times where monofilament will all fish braided line. I'm talking by a margin of 10-1. It can make a big difference at times, especially with live bait. But then there's also times where just be a lot more efficient, and you know, there's a lot of advantages that braided line can have on the flip side, okay? And so get comfortable using both. And again, if your batting average is low using one, switch over to the other. A lot of times that'll fix a lot of your problems when you're trying to catch walleyes on jigs.